Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another JVS movie review. Today, we are bringing you the latest musical biopic brought to us, I think, by MGM. This one is Respect, the story of Aretha Franklin. Let's get into a quick synopsis and the cast, and we'll get into the movie. The remarkable true story of musical icon Aretha Franklin, from a child singing in her father's church choir to the rise to international stardom. Now, this one stars Jennifer Hudson as Aretha Franklin. We also have Forest Whitaker, who plays her father in the cast, and Marlon Wayans, who plays Ted White, which is technically like her first husband slash business partner slash co-writer on some of her earlier hits. Now, as a musical biopic, this is not a transcending one. If you could think of the best musical biopic you've ever seen, this is a few steps below that one, but not so much so that it feels bad. I believe it's better than Bohemian Rhapsody. I think it's on par with Get on the Bus, which was the James Brown biopic done by Chadwick Boseman. I think this was on that same level, and it suffers from some of the exact same faults of that film, but it still gives you a harrowing performance from Jennifer Hudson as Aretha Franklin. Now, the movie starts off with Aretha as a kid, and we get to see her at her father's Saturday night parties. Now, in this film, it portrays that her father, one, is a pastor, two, he threw the most outlandish, wild parties humanly possible, which kind of contradicts him being a pastor, but it's neither here nor there. And we see that at this party, everyone knows she's a future star. Everybody knows she has an amazing voice, and she uses her voice, she uses her talent, and then tragedy hits her. The first tragedy is a hinted at molestation. Then the second tragedy is that her mother passes away. So they use these two tragedies, I believe, to cornerstone what made her the person she became. Unfortunately, we spend maybe the first 25 minutes of this movie with her as a kid, maybe 15 to 25 minutes of this movie as her as a kid. And it feels too long and too drawn out because they don't show us anything substantial with her being a kid and why we need to focus so much on this time period. It is confusing just because they hint towards very traumatic events, but they never stay with the very traumatic events. It was almost like they said, okay, we have to admit that this happened, but we don't want to think about it, so we're not going to put it on film, really. We're not going to dive deep into the emotions that may have been coming from her being a kid, a child, a very young child, I think maybe 11 or 12, pregnant. Nope, we're going to glance over most of that. And then we get a huge time jump to now she's a grown woman with two children, and she's leading her father's choir in a way, singing at different marches with Martin Luther King, who's also in this movie. And the time jump threw me off completely, to be perfectly honest. It threw me off because it was like, wait a minute, like you had an interesting story and then you completely jumped. But even when I thought the story as her as a kid was interesting, even I acknowledged it was there too long. Like, it felt too drawn out. And because of the kid part feeling so drawn out, I think they rushed through the earlier parts of her career. So then we get to see her dad thinks she's talented. We get to see her first record contract she signs. And then she drops albums. We know nothing about the albums because they time jump all of her early albums. None of the ones that most people know, but all of the earlier albums before her big mega hit comes out, we time jump so much stuff. We don't fully even understand why she struggled as an artist at this time period. We don't get any of that. Instead, we get introduced to Marlon Wayans' character, Ted White, again, who eventually becomes her first husband. We get introduced to him, and then during the time jump again, then we get introduced to him again. But as an audience, we're lost because we don't understand fully what's going on here. And again, it just feels drawn out. It felt, and this one didn't feel drawn out in a good way. It felt drawn out in a lazy way. Like, wait a minute, why are we constantly time jumping, and we're still not getting to know and understand Aretha? But during this whole time period, we still get some beautiful musical numbers, harrowing like musical performances from Jennifer Hudson, even through these time jump of moments. We get Forrest Whitaker attempting to preach. Not something I ever need to see again. It was not believable in any way, shape, form, or fashion. That kind of is hard to say because Forrest Whitaker is a great actor, but there he was not that good of an actor, and it didn't come across as believable. But then we get to the meat of what makes Aretha Franklin. We get to the meat of the story of her first big hit and how that came to fruition. But I felt with this film, we never stayed long enough in those type of moments that would make us fully understand why Aretha Franklin was Aretha Franklin. Instead, we went from one hit to a little bit of fast forwarding to a second hit because of the way the film is shot, it feels like it's years apart, and it feels like nothing came really in between because they're not even explaining to us how anything came in between. Her romance with Ted, it feels choppy, and it only feels choppy because at one point in time, something bad happens in their relationship. The next scene, they're together again. And we're like, wait a minute, like it's something in the middle there that we should get more information about, and we never get it. We never get those quiet moments that will make this film even better. So then, as we jump, and we constantly time jump, to me, we time jump some of the classical things that made Aretha Franklin the artist, the writer, the icon that she is. We skip a lot of those moments. We skip a lot of opportunities to talk about her career more. Instead, it felt like they skipped to get to the dark places that she had to go through, her alcoholism that she had to overcome, and her family at times that she had to overcome. It's like they wanted to fast forward until we got to those moments while giving us beautiful musical moments in between, with Jennifer Hudson doing her best to put on a great performance. She does her best in this movie. The problem is the storyline skips too much stuff that would make us feel closer to Aretha Franklin. And that's the downfall of this movie. This movie has a great central performance. Forrest Whitaker as her father is decent. He's not the best preacher, but he's decent in the film. Marlon Wayans is believable as the husband, and he does a really good job as the husband, but it just feels like the story betrays them. And because that story betrays them, we end up with a film that just feels incomplete. The film decides to end at what most people consider the pinnacle, the height of Aretha Franklin's career, which is the Amazing Grace album and the recording. And the film ends there and then gives us the typical prologue that you get. But it just feels like it could have been done better. It feels like it could have been tighter woven together as a story. And because of that, you're not going to get the movie that you want. But you're still going to get a very entertaining movie. Again, you're going to get entertaining performances. Jennifer Hudson, and again, when she hits musical numbers in this, it is amazing. It will blow you away, but we kind of knew that coming in the door because she's a great musician with a great voice. We kind of knew that coming in the door that was going to happen. In her quieter moments as Aretha Franklin, she's really good at it, and the performance is great. Almost award-worthy type of performance that I wish we'd have gotten more out of in this movie, but we don't. But again, that's what separates a movie that most people consider like a great biopic, like a Ray, versus a Get on the Bus. It's the same thing, where you didn't feel you got enough of James' character or Chadwick being able to portray James. That's how I felt here. We did not get enough of Jennifer Hudson being able to portray Aretha Franklin, and at times it feels like the story is incomplete, and maybe you should watch the series that came out instead of the film. But Respect, which is coming out August the 13th, out of a possible 10, I'm going to give Respect a 7 out of 10. It is still an enjoyable movie. It is one of those crowd-pleasing movies. huge numbers, huge everything. You're gonna love it. You're gonna want to sing along. You're gonna want to cry at certain moments in this movie. You're gonna want to dance. You're gonna want to shout. You're gonna want to do everything. But you can also acknowledge the story isn't what you wanted it to be. As someone who's a huge fan, I'm a huge fan of Aretha Franklin. I'm a huge fan of music. And I know enough of her story that I wish more of that was in there. But we don't get it. But in the end, we still get an entertaining biopic. This has been another JVS movie review. Peace, people.